boards, including Urban Minds and Frida, the Young Feminist Fund. So welcome, Eugenia. I would also like to invite upon Racheal. So Racheal Kalaba is a passionate educator, blogger, and activist with extensive experience in international development and education in Africa. She founded and created Lhamo, a women-led African organization that aims to make technology and STEM education accessible to girls in Zambia. Racheal is an educational consultant for Elevate Wellness Solutions. Additionally, Racheal is a research fellow at the University of Toronto and Laurier University, focusing on the role of African school leaders and education policies in Canada and Africa. She is currently pursuing a PhD in comparative education and international development at OISE, the University of Toronto. Racheal's research interests center on African Indigenous knowledge using Ubuntu, African women's leadership, education policy, Afrofeminism, and decolonization. Racheal holds a master's degree in development practice, a Master of Arts in Management, and a Bachelor's of Arts in Development, and a postgraduate diploma in Responsible Leadership and Management from the Swedish Institution Management Program. She has presented her research topics at several international conferences on women's leadership, decolonization, and education policy in Asia, Africa, and North America. Racheal has also co-authored a book's chapter on sports development. So welcome, Racheal. And then last but not least, we have Chemi Lhamo. So Chemi is a community organizer, human rights activist, and currently serves in the Leadership Council of the World Liberty Congress. She is the Canadian representative for the International Tibetan Network's Steering Committee and serves as Parkdale Neighbourhood Land Trust Board. Her work has been recognized in Maclean's Top 50 Power List of Canada 2022. A former U of T School of Cities and Music Institute Fellow, she is the recipient of the Global Tibetan Youth Icon Award and 2022 Toronto Urban Heroes Award for Social Issues. Ms. Lhamo has previously served as the CEO and President of the Students' Union at the University of Toronto Scarborough and the boards of the Canadian Tibetan Association of Ontario and Students for a Free Tibetan Canada. She's also an Oslo Freedom Forum speaker featured in Oslo, New York, and Guatemala. So welcome. So I'd like to start off by asking all of our panelists to just introduce yourselves a bit more. I know we just did go through some bios, but maybe you could touch a bit about on some of the work you're doing and some of the current initiatives that you were partnering with. We can start from Anthony.
Okay, well, thank you for the advice. This is great. I think I'll start with the positionality that I'm an immigrant to Canada. I moved a few years ago from El Salvador, from Central America, and so that's sort of colored the way that I navigate civic engagement. I can't yet vote, and so I've tried a system works here, and how I also can have some input if it's not through voting, then through engagement with communities. That's how I come to this work. And that's how I've learned a lot about Canada and where I live, my new home here. I work in education technology at the moment, but still very much engaged in doing community-based participatory action research with immigrant women here in Toronto, bringing to light issues that we care about, that we think are important, and that we have solutions for, and working with community organizations to get those to happen.
Perfect, thank you. And then we'll go next to Racheal. Did you just want to pass this over to Racheal?
Okay, yeah, so originally from Zambia. I will still position myself as an African woman, migrated between Winnipeg and now Toronto. And in my engagement was really like in Canada, being an immigrant, of course, I cannot vote, but I engaged mostly with the student unions, and I also engaged myself with communities, and also made sure that I was also engaged back in the roots in my home country. So whatever I did learn as tools of engagement, I'll definitely take it back there, because I see that engagement now, post-COVID, is literally with your phone. So every time the engagement that I am with is really working with young women in Zambia. And I think for me, the passion even grew more when I realized that how disadvantaged Africa is, especially young women, when it comes to aspect of technology and the privileges that Canada Canada enjoys, be it an immigrant or Canadian, and how we can really tap into exchanging these barriers together. And also being aware that when we define young people, it's not, there's so many things that really define young people. So for me, when you look at a young person between 16 and 29, the issues that we will definitely talk about are issues which are very diverse based on the age group. And for me, I also become aware of that. And the location and the geographical location and the privileges that it brings me here in this space, I'm also aware and very thankful to Dr. Lou for inviting me in this space. Thank you.
Welcome. And why don't you go ahead, Chemi?
Well, hello everyone. It's an honor to be here on stolen land in many ways. And I always acknowledge that because I also come from stolen land. I come from the land of Tibet. It was occupied by the Chinese government about 64 years ago. And so for us, my grandparents fled on foot over the Himalayas into India and Nepal. And I am third generation a stateless person. So not even as a refugee, we had to be born as stateless beings that didn't have a piece of paper that said, here we belong to a country. So that's why when I talk to young people around the world, I say every Tibetan that was born after 1959 is born an activist. So activism comes not by choice, but as a purpose for our people, without a doubt. And so with that said, that's much of the work that I do in the human rights world and in the international space, constantly fighting for freedom and justice and the right to democracy in all parts of the world, fighting authoritarian regimes, which is not necessarily the easiest task, but it's easier when we do it together. And that's the work that I do internationally, but locally I moved to Canada at the age of 11. And because I grew up in India, I was exposed to the Indian culture, and so I picked up Indian languages along with my mother tongue, which is Tibetan. And then coming here, I realized that much of the issues that we faced as immigrant communities, as stateless beings, as refugees, were actually very similar to a lot of things that other students were going through as well. And so there were so many similarities and parallels to the struggles that we face because of the intersectionalities of our identities as women, as young folks, as students, as whatever it was that was defining us at that moment. There are parallels and commonalities, and that's when I realized the power of community, and hence why since the age of 13 I volunteered in various organizations that landed me in student union leadership positions, but also in community organizing. So recently, just the recent city elections, I actually ran for office for Park High Park. We took on an incumbent that was there for 16 years. And everybody assumed that we'd get 2% of the votes, but we ended off with 31, just 3% short of the 16-year incumbent. So that sets us up well for the next elections. And that's where I am at the moment, in between my different worlds of international activism, but also local politics. And then I carry a degree in neuroscience and psychology from UT. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It is truly an honor to be here and having this conversation with the three of you. And as an ally, I also feel very privileged to be able to support the empowerment that's taking place in this room. So thank you all for taking this time. So to kick off our panel discussion on empowering young women towards civic engagement, let's start by exploring the importance of their active involvement in communities and the democratic process. So understanding the significance of civic engagement can help us appreciate the role young women play in shaping society. With that in mind, I'd like to pose the following questions to Racheal. How does civic engagement empower young women to have a voice and make a difference in their communities?
Thank you so much. I'll go back to listen to this amazing work. In terms of their civic engagement, you can see the empowerment itself is testament. And one of the things I realized, especially with the geographical location I'm looking at as young people, I feel like between the ages of 16 and 29, we have a disinterest in civic engagement. A disinterest, civic engagement, I'll simplify it to family levels. You don't want to learn to cook because you're doing TikTok. No offense, I love TikTok. You do not want to engage, to understand your family, your culture, because there's so much going on and the stresses that life brings around. And then when you start defining what a community is literally people like us who are already being defined as a community, where 3 or 4 of you have similarities in terms of your socialization, in terms of your culture and stuff. So you see that because of that lack of disengagement at family level, you can even see it at student level. I recently was looking at statistics because I'm a student in UFT. We found like literally 3% of students took part in voting. So that is a typo. And you find that even statistically looking at the present students who are here, it's also an issue of where do my interests lie. I was talking to my colleagues saying that, listen, civic engagement is having an interest on how everything is being run from the budget, family level, from who picks the garbage, from the type of school, from getting loans, from getting grants, from the types of jobs you also want to do. And then also civic engagements, what COVID has done is that we cannot survive without it. So usually if I go back to the indigenous perspective that I've taken up with Ubuntu, which is an African perspective which says I am because you are. You are because I am. And everything that's centered around human beings. And what we've noticed in this current generation Z is we're centering technology. And I would argue to say technology is just part of our coexistence as a people. And civic engagements requires us, first of all, to be human. And to be human defines there's no gender in it. If you look at the aspect of humanity, it has no aspect of the definition of your social status or your age or religion. We look at each other in terms of the humanistic approach. And that humanistic approach for me, I look at key things that we want to excel centers on, which is love, empathy, community, coexistence, respect, spirituality, and going back to the land. If we start missing those types of things, we start looking ourselves disengaged from family, disengaged to our daily lives. We have increase in so many vices. We go back to drinking alcohol or to taking different things. So civic engagement for me is just part and parcel of us being human. It's being able to be, present and aware of things that are going to affect you as a young person. Even if you decide to be like, listen, I'm just going to go to Starbucks and work, that minimum wage is a civic engagement. So you can decide to actually have an interest in how that minimum wage comes about. The types of clothes we wear, it's also a civic engagement. When we talk about issues of women, you like, listen, this is happening in South Sudan, it has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do. If you talk about aspects of the environment, you'll be like, listen, it's nothing to do with me. The wildfires are here. It's got everything to do with you. So the migration, everything that we do is civic engagement. To be aware, to be present, especially for a young person, is a privilege that we have here in Canada that most countries don't even have it. So I think for me, I'm very happy that there's this process where we need to start re-engaging people on the humanistic approach. Because being human has got nothing to do with age. It's got all that into accountability of being present of what's going on and how we impact the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing, Racheal. While you still have the mic, I'd like you to touch a bit upon how does civic engagement among young women contribute to a more inclusive and representative democracy?
Inclusive democracy. What is even democracy? Really, so for me, I would try to be very practical. When you talk about, I still use the Ubuntu because this is the philosophy that speaks to me, that has allowed me to come in alone from a country of origin to be here because I was given an opportunity to work and live in community. The things that I use as a woman, which I was taught by my grandmother and my mom, has actually what you can hear about skills. So when you look at the context of a woman has so much to offer. Yet, in terms of how the system is built, I'll be like, sometimes the system is very patriarchal, but when you look at where we're coming from as human beings, or when you look at certain indigenous frameworks, which I argue, is that the woman is the center of the earth. And that's why if you look at indigenous people, they always say Mother Earth, because there's something gracious that they usually carry. And you cannot develop with leaving other people behind. The essence of a woman is something that because we are here, we're talking about indigenous, I see all these indigenous things, and if you had interest, you see different ways of being where they talk about it, is that the context of coexistence is important. We cannot focus on one particular gender and leave the other one. We have to coexist. So for me, the usage of words like democracy, all these things is not necessary. The first thing we have to be is like, if we're going to be human, we're going to coexist. How do we work together? How do we collaborate? How do I work with you, Jay? So we need to find a way to coexist. First of all, with all these things and naming we've had, I think it's a moment we took a step back and look at it like, what did COVID show us? It did not talk about, there was nothing like age or gender. It was how do we survive together in this? Because there was nothing like, oh, here and there. It was like, we're in this together. They didn't say young people, be this side, women, this side. The whole messaging was, we are in this together. So when we talk about development or anything else, we should still use the same slogan, we're in this together. When it comes to issues of crisis, why is it okay to say we're in this together? When it comes to making decision-making and politics, all of a sudden, women and youth, there's all those stuff coming out. So I think we should start pushing it from the point of humanity. If we're in this together when it comes to crises, let it be the same when it comes to politics. Let it be the same when it comes to engagement. Let it be the same when it comes to sharing of human resources and anything else that comes with it. We're in this together. Be young, old, women, or men.
That's okay. Well, thank you so much, Racheal. It really is incredible to hear that the approach that we take, yes, while diversity is very important, when we frame it from this mindset that we are in it together, it allows and opens more doors for collaboration and better understanding. So I really thank you for those wise words. So let's delve into the issues that are particularly relevant to young women today. These issues encompass a wide range of areas, including gender equality, reproductive rights, access to education and healthcare, and the gender wage gap. Recognizing and addressing these challenges is crucial for empowering young women and fostering a more equitable society. So I'd like to invite all of our panelists to share their insights and perspectives on some issues that young women face and how each of you is engaging with your communities to reduce these issues. And we'll start with Chemi.
Sure. It's quite a lot. I think I completely agree that if we have a mentality of we're in this together, things would be much better. But the reality is that it isn't. Oftentimes women are left behind. Oftentimes women of color are left behind. Specifically Black women are left behind. When it comes to religious perspectives, there is an uproar in Islamophobia. During COVID times, there was an uproar in anti-Asian violence, right? And we see that. These are our realities. And so I think as much as it's important to have a view that pushes us towards the right direction of bringing everyone together, no one being left behind, we also need to recognize some of the challenges that we have as we speak. And I think you mentioned some of them in terms of the inequalities that exist from a gender perspective. And for me, I think I want to take it really personal. In growing up, I've always seen it. As you can see, I have no issue talking. So in any space I was, if I saw an issue or a challenge, I would name it. And oftentimes people have either said, shut up because you're a woman, or sit down, you're too young, or said, oh, you think you can do that? Just do it yourself. And oftentimes, there's a difference when you're expressing an opinion versus being put on this limelight and said, do all the work, right? And especially as a teenager, when I was put in that spot, I rose to the challenge, although it cost me a couple of other things in my life. I did. I was one of the youngest board members in our largest community here in Toronto. There's about 10,000 Tibetans, and I was 19, I took on the board work. And it was 2 years worth of work while doing school, so I was doing grants while I was trying to intern at various places. So I interned at Parliament Hill, but I was also running an internship program for young people for absolutely no pay whatsoever. And so these are the challenges that we had to face. And it seems like it's not just a personal story. It's so similar to anybody else that you see, specifically women that are in leadership positions. Oftentimes you see that they have stuck their neck out, have been in different spaces where they've been told not to sit down, in the meeting, or being asked to do note-taking because that's the only contribution that women can do. So those are realities I think that we need to acknowledge in a very microcosm level, but that happens in a systemic level. And so how do we address these issues? I think it's being on the table. Right? Conversations are always happening. Decision-making tables are being made because as we are in an institution like this, where constantly decisions are being made today, as one of the MPPs mentioned, Brampton might not be part of Toronto, right? And so these decisions are being made. So how many of us who are affected by these decisions are actually in those decision-making tables is a question to ask. And for me, it's not just getting involved by calling out an MPP, and these are all very valid ways to get involved by reaching out, by text, emailing them about the challenges, but it's also about rising in leadership positions and empowering, not necessarily empowering others, but empowering yourself to be able to jump into these positions when these opportunities open up. And so for me, it was running for office because I was sick and tired of this progressive candidate, and he's supposedly the most progressive candidate in city council, but during pandemic, he was nowhere to be seen in our communities, which is very much lower from high-rise buildings. And so holding them to account and letting them know that if you're not doing your work, we're here to remind you that your position has been put in there because we elected you. It's a public position that has, has responsibilities and has accountability. And if you don't do it, then there will be other leaders that are ready to step up. And so I think it's really challenging the system in every way possible and reminding yourself that you're never alone because everyone is doing this in our own court. So it's just making sure that we remind ourselves of the community, keep going.
A person to be in this space, should I apply to this position? What do I have to offer? And what I found is that your perspective as a young person, your intersectionalities, whether that's being an immigrant, being a woman of color, whatever that might be, is it, that's the value that you bring, as well as your ideas, your perspectives, what you live through. That's it, that's, I think what's important for folks to recognize. So those two things, and lastly, sort of outside the realm of policy making, another way in which I've seen civic engagement sort of support or helping the issues that I care about is through other means. So I'll tell you a story. A friend and I were having a conversation about how hard it was to access sexual health care in Toronto. We could not find a specialist to get an appointment with. One of us had dealt with very specific issues in terms of sexual health and reproductive rights, and that just can't be. We supposedly have universal health care, right? But access is just not there. And so we entered this hackathon that was going to share some of the tools on how to plan, how to do sprints, how to use technology in some way, shape, or form to think about solutions. Thinking, let's try it out, let's see, we have this very specific idea. What we saw is that perhaps it wasn't on the radar of some of the companies that were sponsoring. However, the support that we got from the public was the proof of concept, right? This was an issue that wasn't just us two thinking this is so hard. This was something that affected 100, so many people out there. And we got a ton of support. Once that was out there, once we sort of saw this is, an issue that we can do something about. We got mentorship support, we got tools. All it needed was for us to sort of get out there and try something. And in this case, it sort of worked out. So those two ways, I think, showing up on different ways.
As well, thank you so much. I do resonate with that a bit as well as sitting on boards when you go to that level and what can I contribute here, or do I deserve to be here? But I think that once you do put yourself in this position, you realize that your lived experiences, as you were saying, they really do bring a very unique perspective. And so I want to encourage all of you to also take some time to get involved in various ways. Racheal, are there any other comments you'd like to add?
No, just the contribution, especially for young people and post-COVID, is to acknowledge that the existing tools like Women Focus for mentorship. I feel like there's that gap, and I think all the conversations you are being put out there to do policy, being put out there to do different things, but what is lacking is that one I see is the generational gap of exchange of information. Some of us are privileged because we are working in communities, but you find like most of the young people's parents, or they are not there because they're always working from 9 to 5, so there's no gap, there's no information exchange in terms of what they need to learn. So spaces like this is really a privilege for young people to use it for mentorship purposes, and even to ask real questions. There's no foolish questions, even if questions were mine. I still question myself who am I as a person. We're always going to have this questioning, but I think it's more important to have like a sounding, system where you go to, where like in the space like this, young people are going to flourish because they're going to get the expertise and mentorship access as well. Access is the biggest challenge, and you can see that Women Focus has access to all these politicians. We have access and opportunities. How do we tap into this access and that we're able to utilize them? Because I think it's all about using what has been given and mentoring based on what we're bringing on board. And I feel that the aspect of socializing as communities for young people, I will speak about that. I start noticing that we are more going into our own gadgets. We preferably want to go because everything else is there, so am I even going to do the networking anyway? That socializing, that networking, the opportunity to meet these amazing women is literally a change on its own. It's whereby we can relate. So as much as post-COVID pandemic is to encourage that interface with new people. Very, very important, and that's what is missing, and the gap keeps growing. And that interface allows us to ask the most serious questions, which we're always, procrastinating is the biggest thing that young people are always going to be. Like Nelson Mandela once said that, they fear you not because of anything, they fear you because you have the energy, you have the talent, you are fearless beyond. And because of that, you should know that you can break doors in any way you feel that. But it's that procrastination within our own. So based on that, there's more need to think of mentorship that reaches to your core. And for me, there are two things. Being a Black woman, I must be a struggle. Coming as a migrant, everything, no, you have to have Canadian experience, no, you have to do this. Listen, if you cannot create a table for you, create your own table and this too. They'll come and do it for you. And what does that look like? Create an initiative in your own community. Work in a space that you like most. Create your own table. Very important. We are going to fight this table, yes, and the thing is systematic racism is real. They'll be like, yes, we are open for business, and no. It will go in, it's another angle. You'll be frustrated, yes. You're gonna have tears, yes, but does it mean you give up? No, you don't. Create your own table and a team of people, and use the space like Women Focus where you can be able to flourish and bring your ideas to life. A lot of ideas have come to life when borders were closed. When I say borders were closed, when the COVID closed, we're able to see things that we never imagined because social media just put everything into space. What does that look like? If that is there, which means borders can be imaginary, meaning that even whatever it is, anything that you put your mind and set yourself to say, this is what I want, and this is what I want to do. Create that table and get the right people in the room, and they'll definitely show up.
Well, thank you for those words. They're definitely very empowering. So I'd like to move on to the next topic, which focuses on the impact of policies on young women and the importance of their voices in shaping policymaking processes. Policies have a profound influence on the lives of young women, and empowering them to actively participate in these processes can lead to more inclusive and responsive policies. So calling on Chemi, I'd like us to explore how do policies both at local and national levels directly impact the lives of young women in terms of their rights, opportunities, and well-being.
Public policies shape and condition everything about our environment, specifically in such institutions like that we are in today, right? Public policy decisions basically determine how our social environment is run, and it impacts every one of us. And technically, the public policy is supposed to be intended for public good, right? But again, the conversation becomes about who's on that decision-making table. Because based on who's on that decision-making table, public policies will cater to their perspective and their people, and whoever their definition of their people is. And in terms of representation, even though that word has now been overused in every other EDI work, I think it still is very important, because when we take a look at city council or the members of provincial parliament now that we have, there is a lot of whiteness that exists there. Whiteness and old male folks, specifically in city council that I saw. And I thought that that needed to be challenged, because Toronto is now one of the most multicultural cities in Canada, yet we have a representation in the city hall that barely reflects that. And not only barely reflects it, it's showed in policy, right? In terms of housing. Housing has just recently been recognized as an emergency, right? Specifically homelessness. And we had folks dying in the hundreds during the winter here in Canada, in Toronto. So yes, I come from a world of less privilege in different parts of the world, and I've dealt with every issue with paperwork to be able to belong, only to come to Canada. But then in Canada, we have Indigenous reserves and reservations that don't have access to clean water just 2 hours from here. And that's the reality. And these realities need to be understood, and those are all realities that came as a result of public policy, of those policies that determine this person's going to get the funding, but this person's not. Right? We're going to invest in universities and say that Indigenous students are going to get free education, but they're not even going to make it through high school, so nobody's going to come to university to get that free education. How many of you folks are in post-secondary education and have looked around and see how many Indigenous kids are actually in your school? Technically, their education is free. Why aren't they there? If I had free education, maybe I'm assuming, but if post-secondary education was free, I'm sure more students would be in post-secondary education. But there is a systemic barrier that exists for Indigenous populations. Similarly, that exists in all of our other worlds that we live in. And so for local politics, housing is one of the biggest issues in Toronto. Right? So many of us are trying to be pushed, being pushed outskirts because it's so unaffordable. Housing right now, as we speak, affordable housing, technically one-bedroom apartment should be $1,200, but you can't find anything under $2,100. So that's the reality that we're living in right now. So how is anybody supposed to afford $2,100 for a one-bedroom apartment if the affordable rate is $1,200, and it's supposed to be 30% of your income? These are realities. These are results of your public policies that are in place. The City of Toronto didn't even update that website until recently, until we started talking about it, right? And so these are issues that are at the levels that affect us tremendously. Housing, roof on our head, food, climate, transit. The violence on transit has increased, but they still continue to increase your TTC prices, And if you get a ticket on TTC, it's $200 to $400. But guess how much a parking ticket is? $40. So you're using the transit because it's cheaper, but if you forget to put it on your Presto, you have to pay a $400 fine. But if you're driving and you forget to pay for parking, you have to pay $40. That's 10 times the difference. Do you see that reality? This is because who's in decision-making space? People who drive. People who take transit are not in that decision-making space. That's why it's 10 times more. That's the reality. Right now, as we speak, that's a reality check. That number is just an example of how much differences public policy makes into our realities and our lives. And that's why it's important for people like us, people who should not just take the transit, but people who live different lives, to be in those decision-making spaces to make things different. And I'll wrap it up there. So
This topic was focused just on you, so thank you so much for that. So now let's shift our focus to exploring the various ways in which young women can actively get involved in their communities. Engaging in activities like volunteering, participating in protests, running for office, or joining political campaigns can empower young women to make tangible difference. I'd like to call upon Eugenia to discuss these different avenues for involvement by considering these following questions. So what are some ways that young women can get involved? And how can volunteering community organizations or initiatives contribute to empowerment and civic engagement of young women?
Yeah, so I think we've touched on a lot of ways as we spoke, but just to summarize, and one of the things that I'm most excited about right now is, if you live in Toronto, we have an election coming up. We have an opportunity to, one, get engaged, to learn what are the issues, that people are really concerned about, and we have an opportunity to have our voice heard, right? Like elect someone that will hopefully represent our best interests. I think we all have dealt with affordable housing. I think we've all, if you take the TTC, have perhaps felt a little bit anxious or very anxious about taking it and about your safety. There's so many different things that we need to be listening to what the candidates are talking about and trying to align what I care about, what I know my community cares about, and if I'm not hearing these things, we need to start asking questions. Or what I like to do is pick someone that seems great to you, that you'd like to support, and show up. One of the favorite things that I do around election time is canvassing, which basically means door knocking. So I have an opportunity to chat with folks about what they're thinking, what issues are you struggling with. Sometimes they're similar to mine, sometimes they're very different. But that's really good to know, right? Like where the community is sort of landing there. And we can have a conversation, human to human. Like you said, I love that, right? You might have the opportunity to change somebody's mind or change your own mind. So perhaps that's an opportunity, and that's really easy to do. It might be a little bit nerve-wracking to knock on the first 3 doors, but it gets easier, and I promise you, it's a lot of fun. And really good to also support someone that you really believe in and that you think will do really well for the place where we live. That's one thing. 2, find those community organizations that are close to you. Perhaps you prefer to do it in person or you like online volunteering. That's great too. I always find that it's better when I do it in a group or with people that I enjoy. It's less daunting. It's less intense to feel like somehow I have to solve all the issues that are out there, right? Find a group of people that you enjoy being with and go, apply for a delegation together. Come up with a group activity that you'd like to do. That helps, and it'll be just a lot more fun if you do it with people you care about. Yeah, any additions from you two?
Well, perfect. Well, thanks so much for sharing those. Definitely, I think canvassing was something I wanted to get involved with when I first came to Toronto. And then it's just like, sometimes you get carried away with the hecticness of life, and then you look at the calendar, it's like 3 months have gone by, 6 months have gone by. So it does happen, but I think that when you do put an intentional commitment to taking initiative and action, there are ways that are possible for us to get involved and engage. And before we wrap up the panel, I'd like to open the floor to all panelists. What are some skills or knowledge areas that young women should focus on to develop on and enhance their effectiveness in community engagement and political activities?
I can start off. One thing that has always helped me in life is knowing who I was. I draw a lot of strength in knowing who I am, and I'm able to speak up, speak my mind, and take up space anywhere I go because I know my own truth, right? So no matter what anyone else thinks about me, of me, or says anything directly and confronts me, and I've been to jail for protesting and done a lot of other things that have put me in various dangerous situations, but every single time, even in those most vulnerable spaces, I was able to stand tall in different ways, not necessarily physically, but mentally and emotionally, because I knew who I was. And who you are constantly changes. So you allow yourself grace and be kind to yourself in ways that you allow yourself to be different, right? It doesn't have to be a static thing, and it cannot be a static thing. Impermanence is the truth of life. Everything is subjected to change. There's nothing that doesn't go through change except for change itself. And so allowing yourself to get some time, whether it is a couple of seconds in a day or a couple of minutes in a week or just a monthly reminder to check on yourself, to say, where am I at? Who am I? Right? And once you know, or once you have an idea of who you are or who you want to be, I think no matter where you go and what type of skills you want, you're able to acquire them because you find yourself with, pushing yourself in a direction that will allow yourself to grow. So that has always helped me, and I hope that perhaps you can touch base with your inner self and see who you are, and that will also give you some strength. For me now, I define myself with community, and that has driven me in spaces where I never thought, even just last year, people asked me if I was going to run for office, and I said no. And then like a month later, I was like running a 6-month campaign and taking on one of the big shots in my city, right? But that's because of community, and that was at that time my definition of who I was, and that continues now because that's where I got strength from. So I
Racheal and Eugenia, any skills you'd like to add?
Yeah, adding on top of knowing who you are is also coming to a positionality where, like, journaling, you need to find time to reflect. Reflection can be a spirituality in its own way, Christian, Hindu, whatever speaks with you, having an open to yourself. For me, self-care looks at, taking walks, taking self-care, emotional, physical, well, and your mental well-being is very, very important. Because if you do not take care of this, it becomes challenging for you to even try to take care of other people if you can't take care of yourself. So that's one of the things that I have to learn. And journaling also takes back to being aware. And for me, it's also the self-affirmation. I'm enough. There will be no other Racheal. It's me, myself, and I. And there will be no other thing. So sometimes being comfortable of who you are as a person, with a black person, whatever that is, remove all those blockers and first of all embrace who you are and your family, and that brings healing and that brings so much self-confidence. Self-doubt comes in when you start doubting who you are, and it's also anything you want to pursue, because you'll be like, you want to create something that doesn't exist. First of all, just start from the inner self, but it comes with blossoms, you become a different person. I never thought in my whole life, number one, I'll be working in the not-for-profit, or I will be pursuing my PhD, because I was told before, this thing is not for you, this thing is not for you. But then I decided, who are you to define who I become? I define my own path, and I will lead through that own path based on what I set goals. I go back to my journaling, where I even set up my goals, for the year, have those things, and I look back, I'm like, oh my God, did I do that? Let me tell you, every day, in all of what I've been able to achieve, because I write it down, I come back to it, and I see it, and I define that not what the system says I am, it's what I decide who I want to be, and I pursue that every day. And I'm open-minded. Open-minded is very important, because you might seem your truth is not true until you realize, this is not the truth. The truth is actually, but that's not the truth, there's another thing. So you always have to have open-mindedness to know that there's always something. From this road, I know I've taken so much, and that's why you see us writing most, because I'm still journaling. When I go back, I'm like, oh my God, this I need to do that. And it goes back to networking as well. Something that you can never buy is people who always have to put a name to the face, and it goes back to networking.
Yeah, that's it. I love that. I will close with that. Something that I'm working on constantly is nurturing my friendships and mentorships. Friendships, because to do this work, you need people around you. It's so hard, it's so tiring. You need people that energize you, that help you to keep going, that inspire you, that you're surrounded by that community that will help you out, so that will encourage you as you go. So one thing that I learned from a very good friend now to do that I didn't necessarily do before is when I meet someone amazing, we had a great conversation, I now ask, do you want to be friends? Yeah. Do you want to hang out? Let's continue. Yes, let's continue this. And that's how I've navigated most of what I do now. That's how I get invited to these things. Because of those friendships, but also mentors. And that can be folks in multi-generational spaces. So people that are older than you, people that are younger than you. You might be able to mentor someone and learn as well. So I know it's hard to put yourself out there, but usually people are very keen. If you ask and you tell them why you think it's a great partnership or experience for both of you, they'll usually say yes to you. So that's what I would say. Work on that, and you'll get a great network of people to support you along the way.
Well, thank you so much, all three of you. This is some lovely insights, and I hope the audience got to take lots to learn about. So could we just get a round of applause?